on domestic politics. We have a lot of ministers on the ground commenting on that in a blow by blow. My focus very much continues to be making sure we're building a better future for Canadians.
That was the Prime Minister late last week when asked about Tories riding polling momentum into their convention in Quebec City. As Pierre Poilievre spent the weekend meeting with supporters, the Prime Minister had a very different few days. After some awkward interactions with India's Prime Minister Modi, Trudeau was set to leave New Delhi Sunday when his plane broke down, stranding the government delegation and traveling media and likely delaying the Prime Minister's attendance at his own caucus retreat this week. So while they wait for a fix or a backup plane, let's bring in the front bench. With us tonight, former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, Dan Moulton. He's now partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. He's now a principal at Earnscliffe Strategies. Kathleen Monk was former director of communications to NDP leader Jack Layton and the principal owner of Monk and Associates. And Laura Stone is a Queen's Park reporter with the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. So nice to see you tonight. Dan, I'll start with you. I mean, there's some sort of great analogy in all this plane stuff and getting stranded there about kind of the week and the few weeks and maybe even few months the Liberals are having. But if you're the Prime Minister and the people advising him right now, how worried are you heading into this week and into this caucus retreat?
Look, it's not a great image. If it was an election campaign kickoff, it would be a terrible way to start things off. But we're not in an election campaign right now. Look, I think talking to folks close to the Prime Minister, talking to the folks that are advising him on a daily basis, they know that things are not great right now. They know these aren't great images, and they know these polls aren't great, and they know that the performance of the Tories this past weekend at their convention is not looking very good for them. And so they know that they've got a lot to do, a lot to work on with their caucus this week, and a lot to regain trust with Canadians that are losing confidence that the Prime Minister and that this government are connected with the issues that matter most to them right now, and especially affordability and housing. So I think there's an awareness of the challenges that the government is facing. I don't think it's lost on anyone, the work that needs to be done to turn things around. I would say that looking at what we've seen in the media this past weekend, a fair number of comments from caucus disgruntled about the performance of the government and the place they are in the polls are legitimate. And I think that this Prime Minister's office and this government needs to take those concerns very seriously. They need to put a lot of work in at caucus this week to start to rebuild some trust within their own party, within their own caucus. And then they need to focus on a strategy to rebuild trust with Canadians. And that is the top order for this government. It cannot wait. It's something that needs to be demonstrated action on immediately. Or we're going to continue to see this government in a pretty dark position.
You know, Kathleen, you, Shakir, and Dan have all worked with various, MPs and leaders. When backbenchers start talking to the press on the record about the state of affairs, like what does that tell you, and how difficult is it from the inside to turn that kind of thing around?
It's really difficult when those leaks start to happen. And I got to say, when I heard the news reports that the Prime Minister was experiencing some plane issues that were not going to be fixed overnight, the question came to mind. Is he referring to his relationship with Prime Minister Modi? Is he referring to his relationship with his caucus? You know, because he has so many problems that can't be fixed overnight. And that kind of frankly have been leaving him grounded and his poll numbers grounded to the ground. And so I think that really the Prime Minister has to, whether it's call Scott McCord to get a quick lift out of India, who's the travel, magician that all Ottawa political people use. He's the travel fixer, to get him out of India so he can get to London, Ontario, to actually start talking to those caucus members. I actually think that London's not just, a random pick for the Liberals. Yeah. Not only is it because it's important electorally, we always choose caucus retreats in places that are electorally important, but it has another significance. Actually, just before the last 2015 election, the Liberal Federal Caucus also met in London, Ontario. So I don't know if they're trying to rekindle some of that magic. It's kind of like when you go back to that ex-boyfriend and you're like, okay, we're going to redo the whole dinner that, led to the magic, And so maybe that's what they're trying to do there. But Dan is completely right. He has to do a lot of work this week, and hopefully he can get on the ground to do so.
Do you think that means, Shakir, from the perspective of people who are watching now, let's say, beyond the conversations that happen behind closed doors, something that Minister Champagne kind of seemed to hint at in our interview early on the program, which is that they might actually come out of this retreat with some additional things to put on the table to address affordability challenges? Like, do they have to?
I think they need to show some kind of strategy or some kind of plan, whether that's politically or even public policy-wise. You mentioned these last few months. I mean, if you look at the events that really started changing polls, they had no plan to deal with these events. Look at foreign interference 5 or 6 months ago. I wasn't convinced they had any strategy to deal with the issues management around that. Everything they did give the story more oxygen. Look at Pierre Poilievre over the summer, the rebranding. Literally no resistance from the Liberals whatsoever, or no counter narrative to Pierre Poilievre whatsoever. No strategy to deal with that. Even last weekend with Pierre's speech, no rebuttal, no nothing. So I think we need to come out of this for caucus members politically. You have a plan to counter Pierre Poilievre and his onslaught and the Conservatives. Public policy-wise, look at the last Abacus poll last week talking about the issues that matter to Canadians. A majority of Canadians on these priority issues think the government has no plan or a bad plan to deal with issues like housing affordability and supply, growing the economy, immigration, things of that nature that really matter to Canadians. So I think you bring up your interview with Philippe Champagne. What I heard is when you asked him about what's going to be coming next, his response was, these things are tough. I don't think Canadians want to hear these things are tough. They want to know there's answers. They want to know that people that are in charge are proactively dealing with these nation's questions. I think very simply, they want to know that you know what you're doing. And I think right now, the Liberals have convinced nobody that they actually know what they're doing while they're in government.
Well, to Shakir's point, Laura, even when I try to say, provide an opening, will it come at this caucus retreat? Are there specifics coming, right? The minister couldn't say for sure that it would. He would basically only hint. And I think Shakir's point about the no plan part, even if people think you have a bad plan or a good plan, at least they think you have a plan. That Abacus data, what struck me, and maybe it was Andrew Coyne in your paper who wrote about this as well, is the idea that people think that there isn't a plan. And 8 years in, I imagine that is a big hill for the Liberals to climb from both a policy and communications perspective.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I love it when disgruntled backbenchers give me a call. So, my phone number's out there. My door's open anytime because that's the good stuff. But look, no, the Liberals are feeling a little listless right now. And as you rightly point out, it is 8 years in, and they sort of laid it all out there. And they do need to come up with some sort of renewal in terms of a plan or an announcement. I think there is a recognition that after the cabinet meeting out in Prince Edward Island, that there was some disappointment in the public and from among supporters that they didn't have anything concrete to come out of this. I think there's a symbolism here potentially that the Prime Minister is sure to miss some or potentially all of the caucus retreat in London. And that could be because the Liberals need to look towards a future without him. It maybe isn't just about Justin Trudeau anymore. And I'm not saying he's not going to be the leader that heads into the election. I'm not saying that he's still not the draw. But I think there's maybe a bit of soul searching going on here in the party as to what does life look like without Justin Trudeau? Who are we as a party and what do we stand for? So it might actually lead to some kind of interesting conversations or insights that actually come out of that caucus retreat in London, Ontario.
What's your sense of that, Dan? And in particular, your sense of how much runway people within the membership are willing, how much more runway they're willing to give the Prime Minister to lead efforts like the ones you described in your first answer. Like if they're going to right the ship and sort of rectify what's happened over the last number of months, if not longer, to Shakir's point, how much runway do you think they're going to provide the Prime Minister himself to do that? Well,
I think, as I said at the outset, we're hearing frustration. Liberals are feeling frustrated right now with the position we're in, and perhaps a feeling like there isn't a plan to deal with it, or that people at the top aren't taking it seriously. I started out by saying I think they are taking it seriously. I think they know the depth of this challenge and are ready to take it on. I don't think many Liberals can conceive of a party right now past the Prime Minister. Laura's talking about a post-Justin Trudeau Liberal Party. I don't think many members of caucus or many members of the party right now can conceive of that or want to conceive of that. I think the Prime Minister remains the greatest asset of this party. And I think a lot of people have counted him down and out before. There have been really dark moments in this government's history where the Prime Minister has seemed like he couldn't turn it around or he couldn't come back in the middle of elections. I can remember when Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott resigned from cabinet and thinking, I don't see how the Prime Minister comes back from this moment. And he did. He won 2 elections after that. And so I wouldn't count him out. I wouldn't suggest that there's an inability to turn things around. He is a fighter. And I think moments like this are the ones that he tends to arise to the challenge with the greatest agility. The only caveat, maybe, Kathleen, and last word to you on this, is the historical context this time, right? Because take all the personal stuff out of it or the specifics out of it. For someone to lead their party into a 4th election win
is a nearly impossible feat if you look at Canadian history. So it's that even, added to the complexity that both Laura and Dan laid out, kind of adds something to think about.
But the part of this equation that we're not talking about right now is the opposition that Justin
That's our
Trudeau.
next segment.
Yeah. that Justin Trudeau faces, right? Not only obviously in Jagmeet Singh, but particularly in Pierre Poilievre and what he represents, right? And so I think that will actually in some ways fire Justin Trudeau up going into not only his Liberal caucus this week, but going into the fall.
But why hasn't it already? That's, I think, to Shakir's point, right? Like, why'd they give the Liberals off?
Well, really, we talked about this on Question Period on the weekend a little bit. It bears repeating that the Liberals, frankly, aren't that great about preconditioning voters, framing up their opposition. It's actually been the Conservatives that have been so good at doing. They framed up Stéphane Dion so badly as a blubbering professor and incapable of doing the job. Same thing with Michael Ignatieff. He didn't come back for you. Those were all Conservative ad campaigns that were run really successfully against Liberal leaders. But the Liberals themselves haven't been that effective at framing up new Conservative leaders. In fact, Conservative leaders, whether it's Andrew Scheer or Aaron O'Toole, were very good at actually getting out with their own large ad campaigns. And Andrew Scheer did a very effective one in 2019 until it wasn't effective. He rolled out millions too.
In the election campaigns, the Liberals did a good job of framing the opposition.
In the RIP period, but this pre-RIP period, this kind of wild West period we're facing right now.
Right. Well, since it is the wild, I know everyone wants to jump in. You all have a chance to. I'm going to take a quick commercial break. The front bench is sticking around. We're going to pick up the conversation on the other end of that break. Stay right there.